Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to Wacom webinars. We're going to wait a few seconds for the room to fill a little bit more. My name is Elizabeth Garcia. I'm Wacom's Community Manager for the Americas, and I will be moderating today's webinar. It is my honor to introduce to you to our guest, Bryan Egan, a portraiture photographer and retoucher who works primarily in the commercial, entertainment, fashion, and beauty industries. We want to thank Wacom Canada and Vistec, our partner sponsors, for making this webinar possible. Hello, Canada friends. Please head over to Instagram and support our Wacom Canada community by giving them a follow. This webinar is right now being recorded on Zoom. We will be sharing this recording later on YouTube. I will be asking questions to Ryan. You're welcome to use the Q&A feature to send me your questions so that I can ask them to Bryan. Due to time constraints, only a few questions will be answered, but we'll do our best to get to them all. And like I said, if you miss this session, later today we'll be uploading it to YouTube, and a link will be forwarded to you via email. And next week, you can join us again for an introduction to the world of streaming with Mary Pau, October 12th. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and say hello to Bryan. How are you, Bryan?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, and thanks for everyone joining as well. Like Elizabeth was mentioning earlier, this is going to be recorded. So if there's anything that you need to look back at, just feel free to go back and take a look. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and we will get started. So
can you share with us? Oh, there it is. That's today's topic.
Perfect. Can you see the full screen with the
yes,
big face? All right. Perfect. So we'll get started. So again, my name is Bryan Egan. I'm Canadian fashion editorial beauty photographer. I work mostly with portraits, but I'll just sort of briefly tell you a little bit about myself. Like I said, based in Toronto. I've been very blessed to have worked with some pretty impressive people. Worked for Rankin, who is also a big fashion photographer based out of the UK. I trained under Nick Knight. So those are two of the big predominant names. I've worked, in terms of my work, has been published with The Hunger, The Impression, Dazed and Confused, Mastered, 10 magazine. I've worked with Justin Bieber and a few other celebrities in and around the area. So I have been very blessed in my career to have worked with some pretty predominant names. Like I said, started approximately about 15 years ago. That's when I first graduated from school. Like most, I assisted locally for a number of years, but just wasn't feeling like I was being challenged enough, and I wasn't getting what I wanted out of the career. So I packed my bags and moved to London, UK, contacted a number of the big studios there, and managed to get my foot in the door at Rankin Studio. And so I worked for him for a number of years, started out as an assistant, working really long hours, 100-hour weeks on average. So definitely paid my dues, but I also started working as a retoucher for him just to broaden my skills. From that experience, when I moved back to Canada, I was retouching for international clients, at the same time getting back into shooting again. And I also started teaching, started doing seminars like this, training advanced retouching workshops, and things like that. So my skills, or what I predominantly work in, is, like I said, beauty and fashion and entertainment. So a lot of people, a lot of skin, a lot of clothing. That's where my retouching skills predominantly lie. And so here's a little sample, quick sample of some of the work that I've done. So this is from, as you can see, top left is beauty editorial portrait. Top right is our good friend Justin Bieber. Bottom right is something, campaign I did for Nike a couple years ago. As well, the bottom middle is for the impression. It was sort of a remake of The Usual Suspects. And the last one on the bottom left is a cover shot that I did for Vulcan magazine. So what we'll do is we'll try and quickly get into into an actual retouching, my process, more or less. Just talk you through how I start an image, how I approach it, and then we're really going to play on having fun with color. This isn't going to be an extremely technical seminar or lesson. It's more about pushing your creativity, pushing the experimentation, knowing that there's no right or wrong way. There's better ways, but there's no wrong way to come to a final image. So I will start us off with this image here. Does anyone have any questions at all, like before I get started, in terms of how to start an image or how to go over?
I have a few questions right off the bat. I'm just, let's take care of some basics. I'd like to know a little bit about the hardware and software that you use in your everyday, since you're going to start showing us a little bit about what you actually do on canvas. I want to know what's behind the canvas and what's powering it. So what are your favorite softwares, and what Wacom tool are you using today?
So let's start off with the Wacom. Generally, so now I'm using the Cintiq 24. It's obviously a nice big machine that I can work on the screen itself. So it gives me a lot of freedom, a lot of precision. I can get into the very minute details like eyelashes and skin with a lot more accuracy, because I know exactly where my pen point is touching, and I can affect that a lot quicker, a lot faster, with more confidence.
Do you have an arm or a stand for your Cintiq Pro 24?
I do have the ergo stand, so I'm able to position the screen and turn the screen to my comfort, so I don't have to strain my back or look into the screen too closely. It comes to me, so it is quite the lovely tool. Before this, I was using the Intuos Pro, the medium size, because it fit in my bag wherever I needed to go whenever I was on location. So I'd always have that there, so I could quickly show a client, because that was the one skill that I had as a retoucher, is that I could easily quickly show the client a very roughed up version, but something that they can see, like the color, the contrast, the tone. I could add that really quickly if needed to. So I'd always have the Intuos. I still have it. It's kind of my location tablet, if you will. As far as
everything you're going to show us today on your Cintiq, people can follow along on an opaque tablet like an Intuos or an Intuos Pro.
Of course. All the products that I've used, Intuos to the Cintiq, I've dabbled with the Wacom One. All of these tools or tablets will allow me to use and do the same thing. It's just having a little bit more space or having the freedom to bring the tablet to me rather than having to put it on a desktop and looking at the screen. That's really the only difference. Whenever I'm talking to new students or interns or assistants, I always tell them, if they're using it for the first time, just go online for 15 minutes, because it's such an intuitive, because there's scroll overs, there's buttons, it's navigating through online, just gives you those little skills that you need to practice on. And after 15-20 minutes, you'll probably realize that you don't want to ever go back to a mouse or a trackpad, because it gives you a lot more freedom, and it just makes things a lot easier. It's just 15-20 minutes is really all you need. I'm not going to say you're going to become an expert after 15-20 minutes, but it's really all you need to get yourself introduced to using the product. So just to jump back to your initial question about the other software that I use. So I generally use Capture One when I'm shooting. It's what I consider the industry standard as a database program. It has all the images cataloged in one place. It does multiple things. It's a little bit more intuitive than say Lightroom, which isn't a bad product. It's just not what I need. So Capture One allows me to, like I said, put all my images, all my selects into one place, allows my client, the models, the team that I'm working with, they can see the images as they're being shot. So my camera is tethered to my computer while I'm shooting. Just makes it easier for the clients to see. And then in post-production, I use Photoshop, more or less industry standard. So, and I've been using it for 15 years now. So I've seen a lot of updates and a lot of crazy advancements. Masking has become very, very, very easy, or easier, I should say. They've more or less made it as just a click of the button. But again, using the Wacom tablets and the pens, making masks and creating the little more advanced tools becomes that much more easy. I wouldn't imagine or wish upon my worst enemy to try and mask using a mouse. So without further ado, is there any other questions before we get started on the first image?
No, we're all ears. Thank you.
All right. So as we can see, this is what I have set up final. I am going to just show you what it looks like in the beginning. So, and we'll just wait for my computer to catch up. Got that spinning beach ball. All right, so as we can see, it's a little flat. It's not as exciting. It's a little bit boring. Like the colors are diluted. You don't really see that image that's drawing you in. Obviously, the eyes are still intense, but it's not really saying much. So I'm gonna just duplicate this layer or duplicate this image so it looks like we're starting from scratch. So just a second. Image. We'll just copy. All right. So literally starting from scratch with you guys. So first things first is and then I'll erase all this, is we always duplicate our background layer. It's what helps us. It protects the original image. If we start working too far and we don't like what we've done, we can always come back to the background, because the duplicate is what we're working on top of. So to do that, we're just hitting Command J, or you can go up to the top scroll down menu under layer and then just duplicate layer, which is right here. I'm always trying to make sure that I stay organized. So I'm going to name it background copy, or actually I will name it liquefy, because I will explain that in 2 seconds. At this stage, now that we have our second layer copied, this is where we start to reshape. Anything that we do, we want to establish our shape first and foremost. So if we are bringing composites, meaning images or parts of another image, this is where we do it. We want to establish the shape right off the bat, because when we go into masking later on, we don't want to mask several times, because if we do the shaping after we create the mask, obviously that mask is no longer usable. So we're gonna, like I said, just sort of see if there's any necessary liquefying or reshaping. And we can do that using the transform tool, which is under the edit and then free transform. But the one that I technically use the most is liquefy. And that's, you can do that through your keyboard shortcuts, which is Command-Shift-X on a Mac. And so it brings us to this window. Now, in this particular image, there really isn't much needed, because her eyes are the right shape that we want. Her nose, we don't really see too much, so there's not really much need. I only brought you here just so you guys, when you're working on your own images, this is the time to do it.
Bryan,
Yep.
can you give us an example of something that you would edit in terms of form, before we move on to color and everything else? This, when you say there's nothing much to edit, but can you give us an example of a situation where you would have to change the shape of an eye and why?
Definitely. So now, for instance, with an eye, like perhaps you have an older subject that has like the eyelid drooping or things like that, where my approach is always you help them out a bit. You don't want to go too dramatic, because you're now changing the look of a person to something that's not who they are anymore. But if it's for like a portrait, you're always trying to be subtle. But there's definitely little things like it's kind of like a free plastic surgery. Like if you have like a little bump in the nose, you can just correct that a little bit. Like the shaping of the chin, shaping of the jawline. Those are little tiny things that we can help. And generally, you approach each subject a little differently. So, and again, it also relates to the job. If you're shooting a celebrity where that face is known, you're not going to be doing too much. You have to kind of fit the persona. You don't want to be removing beauty marks or reshaping their face too much, because that's already a recognized face. If you're working with someone like it's their family portrait and they're like, can you help me out a little bit? I want to look 10 years younger. Then that's the client saying to you directly, help me, like change my look a little bit. But there's obviously some ethical reasons why you don't go too far. And obviously you just have to be respectful of that, because and it happened earlier on in my career. When I first came out of school, I was shooting lookbooks and models that are just getting started, so they're not recognized people. And so I would go a little too far and shape them to a point where I thought they looked better, but at the same time, it's not doing them any credit, because that doesn't look like them anymore. So there's obviously times that you have to hold back. The most common times you'll use the liquefy is reshaping clothes, like especially on images where you see more of the model or more of the figure. So like pushing in the hips or showing, making that top or the sweater hug the body a little bit closer, like shoulders, like it's really helps helps the designer's clothes look better on the subject.
Thank you
So
for explaining, Brian. Yeah.
no worries. So let's just continue on. So after I do the liquefying, and obviously we haven't done any here, this is where we start to actually do the retouching, the editing. So we create a new layer, and I don't know if you can see at the bottom of the right-hand corner, there's a little trash can in the layers palette. Right to the left of it, there's a little square with a plus sign. That will create an empty layer, and meaning there's nothing in it. It's just that gray and white box or checkered box. Reason why we want to use the empty layer is because we're trying to reduce how much information our file size. We could easily just duplicate the liquefy layer, but that's just duplicating how much information is in each image. And obviously, when we're posting these to Instagram or social media or our websites, we want the images to come up quickly because we know the time is a factor and our audience's attention spans are less and less. So we want to make sure that we keep the file as small as possible. The quick way to do it on the shortcut or the shortcut keys is Command-Shift-N. That will, again, give us an empty layer. So this is where we do our retouching, like I mentioned. Again, this image doesn't require a lot because I didn't want to choose something that was super technical, but things like the little red lines in the eyes and eyelashes are little things that we can change. So I will use the healing brush, which basically takes a sample from where I choose, and I can do that by pressing the Option key. That gives this little sort of target. I'm going to press on an area where I want as my source, and then I'm just going to brush along those lines. And so I'm just taking a little bit of that red out, again, resampling. And so I just get it to a point. I don't need to go too far because time is a factor on this lesson, but we just want to get a little bit out over here. These little eyelashes are a little bit annoying. The other important thing is make sure your brush size is appropriate to the subject or the area that we are actually trying to correct. If we go with too large of a brush size, obviously when I go to sample, I'm sampling too much and it creates issues. So let's just go back. And how to go back a step real quick is Command Z on your keyboard. That is a much, probably one of the most often tools you'll use is just making sure that did you do it right? And so you can just easily press Command Z. And then to go back is Command-Shift-Z. That's just back a step so you can scan what you've done right and what you haven't. Little things like these dots, little things like this. Just want to make sure that the line looks clean. And that's really all we need for this portion. So again, like I said, I keep everything nice and clean. So I put that into a cleanup layer or a cleanup group, and I just call it CU, stand up for cleanup. And I give it a nice colored label so it's red. So now we're going into the stage of tonal control. Now, how I do that is I use curves. I use two layers, two adjustment layers, and I'll create one curve and I'll make it light. And then I'm gonna inverse the mask. Inversing the mask is by selecting the mask itself. I'm pressing Command-I. That puts a black mask over it, which conceals what that layer is doing. And I'm going to just call that L for light. And then I'm going to create another, and I'm going to darken. And now I'm going to, again, inverse, and I'm going to call that dark. So this is how I do all of my skin work. Every single time, this is my approach. This is the non-destructive way to treat skin. It allows me to go over the areas that are dark or light and just correct them the way I see fit. A little technique that I do to help me see things, because this is obviously a very colorful image. When I'm working in tone, color might actually get in the way of me seeing. There are some instances where you might want to work with the color on, just for speed factor, but while we're going through this stage, I will just show you a little technique that I do. And I basically turn on my hue and saturation and I black it out. So it's now black and white. Now I'm only looking at tones. I don't see the color. I just see, okay, I see there's majority of my image is in the mid-tones to light. And I just do this to help me see things that I want to get rid of, like these little shadows from the eyelashes. Those are very minor, but I can see them now a little bit easier, and it just helps me get through this. And again, another little thing is I can darken it, because all what I'm about to do on these inverse layers, and I'll just put them in their own group, call them my LNDs.
Hey, Brian, I have a question now that you're, taking a look at the entire image for composition and, floss and whatnot. Is there a specific optimal file size or canvas size that you prefer to sort of spot these imperfections?
In terms of like dimensions, so like that really depends on the camera you're using. So like obviously if you're using a medium format camera, your file size is going to be a lot larger than if you're using a DSLR. And again, everyone sort of depends. So the images, the work that I shoot, like I have a 50 megapixel camera, so the images are going to be very large. I can zoom in quite a bit and still get that detail. Obviously, the more detail you have, for a retoucher, great, because you have a lot to work with. Now, can it be overkill? Definitely. I've worked for photographers that were shooting with 110 megapixel cameras. Like these are meant for billboards, and it can be too much. Like when you're trying to retouch hair and you see like the mesh of the wig underneath, and you have to erase the mesh but not affect the hair, and it's just like it can become too much. So to say, is there an optimum size? It's really to each their own, because it changes so much with the cameras. But obviously the more information is generally the better. But again, if you're shooting for Instagram, then there's no point of having your files that large, because everything is somewhat relative to the endpoint or the end position that these images are meant for. So if you're shooting for Instagram, you don't need a 50 megapixel camera. Like a 12 or a 20 megapixel camera is going to be more than enough. And the other drawback or challenge with working with really large files is, where are you going to save them? Like your hard drives are going to fill up a lot faster with content that's really high res. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
So yeah, so now that we've got our image looking somewhat not like what it's supposed to, it's black and white, and it's darker than when it initially started. I'm just going to show you quickly how I use these LND layers. So right now we're going to target these little eyelashes real quick. And as we can see, I don't know if you can see my brush too well because it is just a white circle on a black and white image, but I generally have my brush set to normal. You can see this on the top left. Right now it says overlay. I'm going to just switch it over to normal. I did that by pressing Option Shift N. Obviously, we can come to the scroll down menu and see the different blending modes for your brush. But for now, we'll just stick with normal. We are on the light layer, the one that's marked with an L, and we are going to change the opacity. I like to work with a very low opacity of 2% and a flow of 100. The reason why I have it so low is because I like to go with many, many, many brush strokes because it looks more natural. If you see one brush stroke, like if you're doing it with just one brush stroke, it's very easy to notice where that brush actually, I hate to use the stroke to like, you want to sort of go in making it look like you weren't even there. So go with the low opacity and brush many, many times. And it just, like I said, it keeps the appearance looking more natural. And if you find that you're brushing a lot and it's still not making a difference, then you can increase your opacity. How you do that is just by pressing the number keys. So 10%, you just press 1. 90%, you press 9. If you want 95, you press 95. So it's pretty straightforward. And last but not least, I go over with both my LNDs. So where I was lightening in the shadows, those light areas that were beside the shadows, I now go over with a dark just to help blend that more seamless. So I can turn off my hue and saturation and just put that in a group as well so I can toggle them both off at the same time. So I'm looking at what I've done. So the shadows pretty much gone. So at this stage, and we're going through it fast, but at this stage, we're now going to start playing with our selective color. So we're not treating the whole overall image yet. We're just going in selectively. So we can play around with a number of things. How I usually start off is with a curves layer and then a hue and saturation layer. Now I keep the hue and saturation layer on top because that's just the way I do things. Having a hierarchy of what these adjustment layers do, I find is important because some of them obviously do more than the others. Curves and hue and saturation are two of the more powerful ones. So that's why I start off there. So I'm gonna give my hue and saturation approximately about -25 because that's kind of the way I like it. I'm also going to add or play around with some blue because obviously the colors that we are looking at here are blue and magenta. We will focus on the eyes in a second. So I'm just going to start pumping some blue in there. And it doesn't look like it's affecting much at the moment, but we'll come back and we'll start playing with these curves. So if you can see on my right side on the curves panel, this histogram, you see this big sort of peaking triangle that sort of peaks closer to the right side. What that represents is the information in the image. So where it lies on terms of the light to dark scale. So obviously this big peak is on the right side, meaning more information is in our lighter tones. So we want to add some contrast. We want to make it a little bit darker, give it some more punch. So what I generally do is I start hugging this histogram with my curves. And so I'm just sort of letting the histogram tell me what I should be doing with this curve layer. So now we're getting a little bit more to where we want. Again, I'm gonna add another curves layer because just want to keep something a little separate.
Is there like an ideal curve, or is just all going to be a matter of taste and aesthetic and what you're going for? Or is there
So
something that we're
there,
looking for in the curve?
there's I don't want to say that there's a specific thing that you want in your curves. There are general things that look good, and we usually call it S-curves. So S-curve is like this. So like basically you're taking from the mid-tone or the darker mid-tones and you're bringing it down, and then the lighter mid-tones you're bringing it up. And so you'll see this line sort of mimic a soft S, if you will. That's generally what most people go for, but that's never going to be what you apply to all things, because sometimes you'll have an image that's got way too much contrast, and so you'll be doing the exact opposite. You'll be making, I don't know what you'd call that, but an anti-S curve. So you're bringing up the shadows and you're lowering the highlights. It really depends on the image itself. If you start off with a flatter image, which generally retouchers like, because you can have more control, you can add that contrast. It's a lot harder to take contrast away, especially really, really crunchy contrast. And that crunchy just means more information in the darks and whites rather than the midtones. It's a lot harder to balance that out than it is to add it in, if that makes sense. So
It makes sense. Thank you for explaining, Bryan.
no worries. So we're just going to add a slight little bit of a lighter tone to the curve. And again, I'm only following some of the steps that I'd done before. I know this image. What I would encourage students or people that are playing around, just experiment. Like, you can see this looks different, this looks different. It all really depends on your personal taste. But for what I know this image is to look like, I'm just going to add a little bit of light tone. The next is, no, wrong one. I'm going to be adding levels. So the difference between levels and curves, levels shows the histogram as well, but it's really sort of more about playing around with it's almost the same, it's just a different way of looking at it, because we're looking from the shadows, the highlights, and the midtones, and it's just displayed a different way. We can clip our shadows as well as our highlights, so just meaning that our whites will never get to 255, meaning absolute white, or get to 0, meaning absolute black, which ultimately means there's no information left in those areas. So what we're doing now is we're just going to add a little bit more crunch. We're gonna, that's just about it. We're just adding a little bit of that tone onto the right side, giving some more depth. Then we are going to add a photo filter, because we want to, again, pump that color back in. That blue is looking a little bit soft. So we can, I'll just make sure that you see, we have the option in photo filter to either go through some of the presets that they've created for you, or that they have. These are typical filters back in the film days. And I unfortunately own all of these filters, like physical, and I never use them because now I can just do it in Photoshop. But I can switch over to color, and now I can add the color in specifically. The color that I am working with for this is this specific blue, and we are just going to preserve the luminosity. And just so you're aware, when I'm checking this preserve luminosity, if I don't have it checked, I can basically really, really pump in this blue, and it's not for adding it to a face. I would always check that preserve luminosity on, because it it starts to bleed in to the colors and it doesn't look very polished. So bring it back to 50 and then make sure to check that on. Now we sort of get that luminance that we were looking for. And now we start to play even further. We're going to go with selective color. So this is probably, this and hue and saturation and curves are probably the three most powerful adjustment layers that I know of, because it just gives you a lot of accuracy and specific changes. So like in selective color, I now can go into each of these colors separately and now affect them not with just the luminance value, but like the color value in each of them. So with cyan, I can now pump in more cyan or less, which is adding red, but let's for the sake add more. So add some there, add a little bit of black to the color. So I don't know if you can see that's doing much detail, but we keep on going because cyan, blues. So like, I'm not going to be touching much of the magentas and yellows and these ones because I'm trying to just pump out this bluish tone. So I'm just, and again, while I'm doing this, like pushing the slider, I'm looking at what it's doing to my image. Is it creating something that I like? On the opposite of yellow is blue. Like, is it doing anything? Not much. So I'll move on. Go to my whites because there is a little bit of white detail in there. So again, gonna just be pumping in some more cyan, looking at it while I'm doing it. I like that.
Hey, Brian, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Okay. Brian, James Staples has a question here. Are you given any kind of input on what a client wants when you touch up a photo, or is it mostly purely on how you feel the image should look like?
Well, that is a good question, because ultimately it depends on who is specifically hired me. If it's the photographer that's hired me, then I do my research and I'll directly ask the photographer. I need notes. Like, I'll look at the photographer's work and try to get my head around what that style and what that approach is, because like some love contrast, some love this desaturated tone. I'm one of those. However, there's many that love oversaturated color or like that look. There's some that just, you have to ask them directly, because it will cost you time and energy and reputation if you retouch to your own look and then your client or the photographer come back and say, this isn't what I was looking for. Can we go at it again? And you're trying to please that person because you want to be hired again. So you just waste that time doing it to the way that you think. Whereas if you ask them directly, especially the client, because ultimately the photographer wants to please that client as well. So the most challenging situations is when you have an international client and an international model and an international photographer, which I have worked on for New Balance with Heidi Klum and Rankin. And every single person, like Heidi Klum has her team, New Balance has their team, and Rankin has their team. And you have to coordinate with all of them. So you have to make sure that everyone is happy before it gets released. And yes, it can get complicated, but communication is crucial. You don't want to do any work before you get the specifics of what you're supposed to be doing. Does that make sense?
It sure does. Thank you so much.
No worries. So I think we're almost finished with the selective color. I'm just gonna add a little bit more. Like I said, I'm just playing around, seeing if this does something that I like, because I can add more magenta, less. Like by going on the opposite way, obviously we're doing some nasty things to that color, but we just want to play. And then I think that's pretty decent. So I'll just call this my OACCs. That just stands for overall color corrections. And then lastly, if I'm seeing anything that I want to play around with or want to correct, like now that I've added that color and that contrast, I can see a little bit of the shadows from the eyelashes have come back. So because we've created the order that we've worked in, that color information is on top. Anything that I do below it won't affect that color information. So that's why we work with the tones beneath. And that's why I'm showing you this way, because I knew that there would be some mistakes or things that have been changed due to our filters that we've used. So again, I'll come back to my LNDs layer, put on brush, make sure that I'm working at a low opacity, so 5%. And again, go in, just correct any little things that sort of stick out to me that I'm like, this is too much. Like right now, the shadow that is being created by the brow is a bit intense for me. So I will create a new curve layer. And as I'm looking at the detail that's being affected. I don't care what's happening to the nose or the rest of the face, because that's not going to be touched. So I inverse it. Now I start going in with my brush. And beautifully, it's exactly the way I want it. And I might just sort of help this out a little bit. And just toggle back and forth just to sort of see where we're at. And that looks good. Like, again, not going too crazy. So now we've got the eyes to work with. We want to get those a little bit punchier, because right now they're really dark. They're still intense, but they're dark and they don't add to the color impact that we want to create. So underneath our overall color corrections, I'm going to add another group of layers. Start off with my curves. I'm going to just call this color corrections. So CCs. And this is going to be very similar to our LNDs, our tonals. We're going to inverse our mask. So we are just going on specific spots. So as we open up the curve, I'm looking at what I'm doing to the eye. I don't care about the face. This is all for the eye. So I like that sort of tone, that color. I might just add a little bit contrast and inverse brush. And now I'm just going over the eyes. Now I can go, because I know what it looks like at 100%, I can go at much heavier brush. So I'm at 90% right now. So nothing too crazy. And now I might want to go in with another curve and have this specific to color. So if you can see in the curves layer, you'll have this first drop-down panel says default. This gives you a number of presets: strong contrast, linear contrast, color, whatever. Blah, don't bother. We are intelligent human beings. We can figure things out for ourselves. We don't need presets. So we are going to add the color ourselves. So we're going to go in with red. Now, I have a bit of color theory under my belt, so I understand what colors to combine give you certain things. So I want, and from the example that we were showing earlier, I want these eyes to have a glowing golden orb. So to create a gold color from scratch or in curves, we're actually adding red and green. So red has that sort of rusty, that copper tone that we're going to be, as you can see, it's being added now because it's being overlaid on top of that dark brown. And then this green is, again, I'm only looking at the eye. I'm not looking at the rest of what it's doing. Kind of gives that little touch of gold in there. So again, inverse. And brush it in. Now, I don't know if I can open it up to the panel of people that are, but does anyone can think of a way that I can be more specific or add color that I want other than using curves? I know I can't see anyone, so I don't know if anyone has any questions, but we can do this by selective color. We can add a color filter like we were doing before. Again, play around the density, and again, mask it, brush it in. So we're just, again, adding that control. Now, if you can see, I have brushed a little bit too liberally. Can see it right there. So this is the beauty of masks. I've seen my mistake, and my mistake is super easy to correct. I'm just going to go to that mask, brush with black, and to default your colors, your paint brushes, is you just press D, and to switch from black and white is the X button. So I want to make sure that I'm on black, and I'm brushing on the mask in black, so that is going to conceal my mistake. Don't have to worry, it's gone. And I see it over here, it's gone. Very easy, quick way to correct yourself. And we're really pretty much almost at the end of this image. The last little thing that I would do is crop it if I need cropping, sharpening, and then noise. And noise is a very important thing. A lot of people don't realize it, but it just sort of brings everything together, especially if you're adding a lot of filters or effects or overlays or composites. This noise actually sort of makes it seem like it's unified. So first thing, and because I like to keep everything color coordinated, we're going to now add the sharpening. So how I do this is I merge upwards. I create everything that we've done to this point. We're going to merge the image up. And how we do that is press Command, Option, Shift, and E. And that now gels everything together. And so this is what we're working with. And we are now going to go into the filters. And at the very bottom of the drop-down menu, it says Other, High Pass. High Pass will then bring up a new dialog box. So this is an important step to know that don't overdo it. This is what tells me you're an amateur right off the bat, or you have bad style, because most people over sharpen, or sharpen the wrong things. So this is when you're looking at it in this stage where it's gray. It has this gray. Take a look at what it looks like when it's blasted. So like that's, you want this to be a gray layer. So like what I do is I go down low, and once I start seeing a little bit of that detail start to emerge, like the sharp, like details that I want to highlight, if you will, that's when I stop. So I'm at the point right now, and at the same time, the closer the image is, like of an eye, opposed to a full-figured person. So it's around here. For this image, I would say is enough, like 25, 26. And then I put soft light. Again, too much, it's too sharp. I then mask it, and I put the black mask. The reason why it's too sharp is because this particular image has areas that are soft focus, like the left side. If I put a sharpening filter on something that is intended to be soft, then I look stupid. And like I'm not using it correct. There's only a certain area that's sharp in this image. Like even the brow is blurred or soft because of the depth of field. So I'm only going to put this on the eye because that's all I want you to look at anyway. I want you to look at the eye, and then you can get lost in the rest of the image. So be selective. So with your brush tool and your brush on white, I'm just going to brush just over the eye and maybe some of these eyelashes, because anything that's close to the eye, I kind of want you to take a look at. But this brow, it's already soft focus. What would be like, it would look weird because it's meant to be soft. It was shot soft, and that's what we want to sort of showcase. So now we're almost done. We're going to create a new layer. I did this by Command-Shift-N, or you can go down to that bottom right-hand corner with that box and the plus sign. But this, we're actually going to change to soft light, fill with soft natural light. So that's going to make it a gray layer. Label it noise, hit OK. And then finally, we add noise. Don't need a lot of it. I tend to stick to under 10, like again, the closer up you are of your subject. So in this case, we're really close. It can use a little bit more noise. The further away, the less noise. But again, it's going to be relative to each and every image. There's no magic number. You'll get used to it. The further away or the smaller the subject, the smaller the number. That's my sort of go-to. So let's just go with 8. This is something that you leave, it's not brushing in. And we've put that into our final layer. I call that effects. And last but not least, I'm going to just give it a little bit of a crop. I don't actually use the crop tool. I use solid color because I don't want to destroy or take away information that I might want to get back, or the client would be like, what happened to that outer edge? And I understand what you're seeing I'm doing. I'm just adding a black solid color over top, and then I'm just inversing it by creating that mask. So there's no destruction to the image, no information lost. My crop is still there. I can come back whenever I want. I can change it. And it's still there. All the images is right there. So I think we did it. I think
Wow, Brian, exactly in 1 hour. It's insane. You had it timed.
I've been doing this for a while, so I tried to make sure that I had images that were easy to explain, but at the same time we could get through in a timely fashion. If anyone has any questions at all, feel free to shout them out. I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're both a photographer and a retoucher, correct?
I would say yes. I definitely, in my career, I did one more than the other at certain periods. So I definitely am more of a photographer now. I teach retouching because like retouching can be very time consuming, and I'm at the stage in my career that I make more money shooting pictures and then teaching people how to retouch. But I definitely retouch some of my own work when it's for smaller projects or creatives. I definitely still get behind the Wacom tablet and get my hands dirty. But
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, the reason why I ask is because we had someone in the audience, James Staples, ask about your camera equipment, and I didn't want to ask about camera in the middle of your retouching class. But if you can talk a little bit about
yeah,
just what kind of camera do you use? James would like to know.
I've got a couple of them here. So I'm a Nikon guy. I shoot with an 850. It's technically a 48 megapixel camera, and then my video is a Z6. I've got a couple of those each. But I invested in Nikon, but I can shoot with anything. I used to be one of those types where it's Nikon or not Canon, but I've grown to love Canon products. I've grown to love all cameras. If it can take a picture, and then I like using it. But I prefer, in terms of what I have, is Nikon. The studio equipment, like all my lighting gear, is all Profoto. Just because it's a global company that like Wacom, they're the top, and you invest and you get what you pay for. So I've always believed in paying a little bit more upfront, because I always knew that this was what I wanted to do as the career. If you're just getting started and just trying to play around, don't go overboard, but at the same time, you know that you're going to be upgrading constantly. So if you're in a position to do it, I always recommend paying a little bit more in the beginning and then getting a product that will last you years to come, rather than having to upgrade it a year or two from now.
Wonderful. For those of you that didn't listen to Bryan earlier, he did say that he works on Capture One and Photoshop. Those are his favorite softwares. And he's worked on Intuos Pro and Cintiq Pro as well, Cintiq Pro 24. As a retoucher in the fashion and entertainment industry, what is the one thing that you see gets retouched the most?
Okay, well, there's two answers to that. Like, there's approach. So obviously in fashion, it's clothing. Really, the clothing is the primary subject. And so the challenges with that are patterns, wrinkles, incorrect size. Like, the stylist happens to bring a suit jacket that's 3 times too big for the model, and you're supposed to make it look like it fits. Those are challenging, and that happens often. Now, when it comes to people, there's a different approach to females and males. Generally, the older the male gets, the easier it is to retouch, depending if he's now into the elderly stage, because then you have to figure out what to help out. Like, generally, the hardest part with elderly people is their necks and their chins, because skin is not working for us anymore. But I would say the hardest is your middle-aged woman, because like someone between 35 and 50, because like what ends up happening is you take too much time off, like because you're trying to correct their skin or trying to just help them out a little bit, and then after an hour or two of skin editing, you realize you've just taken 10 to 15 years off their life. And so you have to like add it back a little bit, because you have to be respectful of who they are as a person, their age. Now, they may love it, and if they love it, then fine. But if it's a celebrity, like the one person that I've retouched probably more than anyone is Heidi Klum. And she's not the easiest one. She's a beautiful woman, but she's now, when I was retouching her, she was 45 to 50. And so it's like, what am I supposed to, because there's sometimes for some ads or some companies, you're asked to make her look like she's 35, like make her look young again in the prime of her career. And then there's some where I won't say who it's for, but you could probably guess. I had a campaign that involved Heidi Klum that said no makeup and no retouching. As a retoucher, what do you do? You're like, so how much retouching is supposed to go into this ad campaign? And you feel it out. But I would say, to hopefully that answers your question, that the most challenging would be middle-aged woman on average, because the younger they are, the skin's beautiful, you have very little work. And older men, they actually want them to look more rugged. So just put a contrast filter on there and you're good to go. But middle-aged woman, it all depends on the client and the person shooting and the sitter, like what is right for them at that time.
Right. Well, that's very interesting and a very interesting discussion. Maybe later we should have some sort of panel to discuss the ethics behind retouching. I have a few retoucher friends who have touched briefly on the subject, and yeah, I would love to, invite you back for a similar discussion. I
That'd
would
be
love
great.
to see the different perspectives. And also you mentioned earlier something that sort of sounded like a webinar topic, something like, the number one retouching mistakes you see out there, and how you can possibly spot just with one of these things an amateur, and the amateur moves that a seasoned retoucher can spot just by looking at an image. Would be interesting to bring you back to sort of point those out to us.
There's a lot, and again, being in the industry, you understand that there's a lot of other things that go into these mistakes happening, like really tight deadlines, like unrealistic turnarounds. But at the same time, there's a lot of things that you see on Instagram and in global campaigns where you're like, ugh, had they just approached it a little differently. But that's part of the experimentation process. Everyone has their own desired look and their own likes and dislikes. So that's the beauty of art. What I may like, you may hate, and vice versa. Like, and that's what makes us all artists in our own right. We can create our own visuals. But there's definitely, not to contradict myself, but there's definitely a more right approach, but because there's 1,000 ways to do things. But it's just how to eliminate some of these common mistakes that don't help your image looking any better.
With that, I think we can say this webinar is a wrap. Thank you so much, Bryan, for your time, for all your insight. I do want to invite you back. Thank you to our sponsors, partners, Vistec and Wacom Canada. Thank you to my team, Patricio and Tom, for helping us out today. And to our audience, thank you so much for being so respectful and for all your questions. All right, guys. Well,
thank you.
Thank you so much, Bryan. We will definitely see you again soon. And thanks again for everything. We'll see you back in Wacom webinars next week.
All right. I will see you. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye.